evening and welcome to our City of Keystone Heights Vulnerability, I'll try to say this correctly, Assessment Public Meeting. And I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is July 13th, 2026 at 5 o'clock. Mr. Booth, can you give us a roll call?
I can, Madam Mayor. Councilman Knight.
Present.
Vice Mayor Welch.
Here.
Councilman Lewandowski.
Present.
Mayor Rodenroth.
Present.
And Councilman Ludwig.
Present.
Madam Mayor, you have everyone accounted for and quorum.
Okay, so we want to open this up for a public response from anyone. We just open it up if anyone wants to make any comments at this point.
Yes, ma'am. We have no written comments, and everybody that's in the room, unless Ms. Sampson wants to make a public comment at the beginning, we have no public comment.
Okay, great. And so we do have a staff presentation on the vulnerability assessment draft, and it's the critical infrastructure list. So we have several guests in our audience tonight.
Yes, ma'am, I can make introductions.
Please, yes.
And so I'll just start off, I'll introduce Ms. Jennifer Smith. She's our project manager with Chidmore & Associates, one of our 3 engineering firms. Chidmore & Associates is helping us with the comprehensive flood vulnerability assessment. I'll just say it for public record, for the 2 people who may be making all sorts of comments on Facebook and then actually watching the video. So this is a state requirement. So per state statute, every municipality and every county in the state of Florida has to conduct a comprehensive flood vulnerability assessment. We're probably one of the last municipalities in the state to get it done, which is probably one of the reasons why we got the full grant amount of $200,000 to help us through the process. So I guess timing is everything. And so we asked Chidmore & Associates to come on board and help us go through the grant and actually manage the engineering work that's behind it, but also the public engagement. And so I think, yes, we understand that the city of Keystone Heights probably is not going to have large-scale long-term flooding. However, we do recognize that there are areas within the city that might see nuisance flooding. So when you get 3 to 6 inches of rain, there might be areas that do not drain off quick enough. We want to understand where those are, what the issues are within the city, and make sure that the critical infrastructure that is in the city, which is a part of the critical infrastructure list that we're looking to make sure we have identified all the key pieces of kit in the city, so that when we do the modeling of what happens in a comprehensive flooding situation, that none of those are damaged in that process. Or if they are in the modeling, then we put in mitigation measures to make sure that that's prevented in real life should we see a flood come through. So that's what the process is. I think I have said enough, and I'll ask Ms. Smith to jump on up and go ahead and run us through the presentation.
You're going to introduce all the...
Well, I'm going to let Ms. Smith then do other introductions.
Okay.
Yes, hello.
She'll introduce her team.
Thank you for having us. So yes, Jennifer Smith, Chidmore & Associates. Pleasure to be here today with our team. I have Mike Bell with Bell Engineering, and I have Grace with Brazaga doing the public outreach. So yes, we're doing a vulnerability assessment for the city. As Jamie mentioned, this is state funded and state requirement. So what we're going to be kind of walking through, if you want to continue with the slides here. So ultimately, kind of our agenda, our outline, I just went through our introductions. So yes, our project purpose, what is this Resilient Florida grant program, why we're doing this project, the vulnerability assessment framework, and our timeline and milestones that we have throughout this project. And then any Q&A we'll have available. So yes, project purpose. So really examining the vulnerability and the risk of critical assets. And I'll kind of dive into what makes a critical asset and why it's important to analyze. We want to protect and mitigate those priorities, those properties, those critical assets. And then that also gives us funding eligible, but we will be eligible for grant funding in the future. Having this completed, then if we do find, like as Jamie mentioned, if we find something that needs to be mitigated, then we'll be eligible for that grant funding. So this project will help the city better understand the flood risk and identify those future opportunities to improve the community. All right, so yes, Resilient Florida program, this is where the grant funding came from. So May 2021, the governor signed this bill that went into effect. So this gives us the funding that we needed to produce this. As Jamie mentioned, all the other municipalities, counties, everyone else is doing this very similar vulnerability assessment, and ultimately all goes into the state vulnerability assessment as well. So the state awarded $275 million in grant funding a few years ago, and that's what's been ramping a lot of these types of projects. So this is not city funded, this is all state funded. So just to kind of explain what is vulnerability, right? So we are going to look at the assets exposure and the sensitivity. So this example, we have a fire station and a park. So we want to look at, and we'll jump to the next slide in a second, this is you have the same flooding event happen on both of these properties. We want to see which one is more greater of a risk for sensitivity. So let me just read through this. So with equal exposure, the flooding of the firehouse has a greater impact on the community than the flooding of the park. So that asset is more sensitive to flooding, it's more critical than the park, and it's more difficult to adapt. Therefore, the firehouse is more vulnerable because it provides the critical emergency services to the community. So this just kind of helps generalize and understand, when we're looking at these critical assets, and then we'll look at the exposure, how much flooding they're going to receive, and then which ones are more sensitive than the other ones. So ultimately, that's kind of the bigger synopsis of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So here's our timeline. We started with the data collection. We did a lot of that already. We got a lot from the city. We started collecting stuff from Clay County, CCUA. There's existing stormwater models out there that we've been collecting. So we've done a lot of that initial data collection. So today we're at our public meeting number 1. We have a total of 3 of these public meetings throughout the course of the project. So the next step is really, once we have those critical assets determined and finalized, we'll move into that exposure analysis, and I'll go through all of these steps in the presentation here. But ultimately, these are our 3 steps, all of these steps, we have 3 public meetings. Public meeting 2 we'll have after some of the modeling's done, and then our final public meeting number 3 will be after the completion of the report.
So I would call this a sequence because there's no dates associated with it. It's not a timeline.
Correct, yes,
Okay.
sorry. We do have the grant itself has a grant agreement, and there are timelines associated to those, so I can give you those if you need it. I just did not put those in the presentation here. All right, so as I mentioned, the step 1 was all the data collection. So this is just some of the data that we collected, FDEP flooding standards. We have various storm events that we have to model for the vulnerability assessment. So we have those rainfall amounts for those different storm events, as well as, like I said, for CCUA, we got a lot of their infrastructure, so we know where some of their lift stations and plants and such are. So we compiled that critical asset list. We sourced some of FDEP's statewide data for their critical assets, as well as coordinated with Jamie and city leadership and CCUA to develop that list.
Is this the entire area in the map there, or?
So that's the outline of the city. Obviously, there are I'm going to have a map in a few slides that shows where those critical assets are around the border of the city.
It's not the entire city, though. We have the cemetery and the airport also.
They're not in city limits, sir, so that won't
Yes,
be
they
part
are
of
in
it.
city limits.
Cemetery, yeah. Cemetery and the airport are not in city limits.
They're considered part of the city of Keystone Heights.
But they're not city limits.
I've never heard that before.
Not contiguous.
I agree with
saying
that.
they're
We
not
should do that.
ours, but that they're technically part of the city.
I've never heard that they are not part of the city limits. Never heard that. Never heard that. Who told you that?
Well, we can confirm it with Rich, but I'm pretty sure they're not in the city limit.
They're not in the
airport's
city
4
limits.
miles.
That's
So
city
the airport is
property.
4 miles from
They're
us.
city property,
Mhm.
but not in the city limits, that's always
I've
been my
never
understanding.
heard that before. All our ordinances apply there.
Well, and it would, because it is city property, but like the city of Stark, for example, will own like yards that may not necessarily be contiguous with the city, but they're still owned by the city.
I've never heard that. Never.
I wish we
Okay,
had all
all
of
right.
that all between there and here. Be
Yeah,
great.
no,
Yeah.
I'm surprised. I'm totally surprised. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Sorry
yeah.
to interrupt.
No worries. Yeah, let's jump to the next one. So just what is a critical, and I'll touch on the airport in a second. But yeah, what is a critical asset? So these are just some of the examples. So evacuation routes, main state roads that we want to make sure are, available for if there is flooding. We want to make sure that that's that corridor, emergency access corridor. Again, the critical infrastructure. So we have utilities, stormwater systems, communication. locations, facilities, certain schools, like we were saying before, emergency facilities, fire stations. So again, this is just a list of what we've considered critical assets. This is according to the FDP as well. So this is everything that we've collected, and we've prepared that list. If you want to jump to the next slide, this is just an example of some of those that are listed. Again, this is not all of them. But the next slide will show a map of all of those locations. Again, I do believe that Jamie included it in the agenda, and I can share those amongst everybody, but this is just a map just showing where those locations of those critical assets. So there are some that you can kind of see that are outside of the city boundary. The end goal is we're going to be modeling this. So those can be included just because they are part of the watershed that ultimately collects and is impacted within the city. But once we looked at the airport and the distance away it was from the city, we can include it as a critical asset, but the extent of the modeling and looking at the vulnerability assessment for it is much further away from the city, so we may not be including the airport, but that's something we can discuss at a later date. If that is something that the city wants us to include, we can look at the modeling for that. But right now, these are the critical assets that we have in our list. Again, some are outside of the city boundary that we can include in our model.
Such as the fire station is the best example.
Yeah. So this is kind of just where I guess the task is right now is just finalizing this critical asset list with the city, making sure that we're good with all of these before we move on to that next step of the modeling. All right, so then once we have all those, the next step again will be the modeling. We kind of started laying out the city in these different basins. These are what's shown in yellow here. So these are all the different topography, based on topography and the stormwater infrastructure. All of the model is kind of boundary by these conditions. We're looking at the conditions of the lakes and how everything's interconnected right now and how we want to model that. We're trying to pull some modeling information from the Clay County model. So we're really in that phase right now of generating this model. But ultimately developing this H&H model, we're going to do the various extensive flooding, the 100-year and 500-year that's required for FDP for the vulnerability assessment. And then moving on, so once we have that model, we'll do that sensitivity analysis. So we're going to see, okay, where is that impact of flooding against all of these various critical assets, and look at which one has the heavier risk and is more sensitive. So then we'll start prioritizing those results and see, is it an extreme need, a moderate need, and where we might need to, look at improvements. So from there, we'll have all of those results. We'll go to our next public meeting for some additional input. We'll give all you guys an update of where we are. And then from there, we'll go to our last step is ultimately developing that vulnerability assessment. Go to the next slide. So this will be the kind of the last product that we'll have based on all of those model results. We'll get any feedback from the community, detailed results, conclusions, all of our maps. We'll prioritize all of those assets and ensure all of this is in compliance with DEP's requirements. And then we'll have one last final meeting just to discuss all of the results and conclusions. This is very in line. We've done a lot of these throughout the state. So this is all very similar, process. Really nothing of concern that I wouldn't think of. I'd say the only thing is really just, looking at, now that you kind of mentioned at the airport, if there are any additional assets outside of the city limits that we may want to incorporate. But this is pretty standard as far as what the grant requirements, what the grant agreement has, and everything that we've done for many other municipalities in the state. So that is our presentation. If you guys have any questions?
Question, even though they're not, they are with the city, Clay County Utilities and Clay Electric, does your vulnerability address their vulnerability, or they have their own studies and so on?
Yeah,
As
so
input?
we try to incorporate those as vulnerable, because that is going to still impact your residents, right? So if there are lift stations, if the plant goes down, if anything like that. So yes, we still want to look at those as critical assets, even though the city itself may not be able to upgrade and improve those. We can still definitely share that information across all assets.
Interruptions there.
Yeah.
Second question is, what sort of assumptions or inputs do you have relating to like 100-year flood zones or things like that? Does that factor in? Do you use some mean water level like I have to study when I apply for a waiver?
Not necessarily. Maybe in the model development, we'll look at the groundwater levels. We'll look at some of that, the tailwater conditions of the lakes and such, and especially how they're going to be changing in the future. So that might be going more into the model development, but specifically for the assessment, they just look at the various storm events. Typically, they look at sea level rise, but because we're not as impacted out here in the inland community, they have various requirements as far as what we model and how we model it. So they want specifically the 100-year and 500-year. And that's more just the rainfall impact.
Do you know if Clay County has finished their flood assessment?
Their vulnerability assessment or their model?
Their vulnerability, their flood vulnerability assessment.
So we were asked, I forgot who was the consultant that did, we reached out to them to get the model.
They did do it.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
They
yes.
did the flood study, but I'm not sure that was part of the
Correct.
vulnerability assessment.
Yeah, I'm not sure the level of Clay County's vulnerability assessment and the status of that. I know we've reached out to the consultant that did the modeling, so we were able to pull a lot of those boundary conditions is what I was mentioning. So when we create your stormwater model, we'll make sure that it includes all of that to the best, information we have.
And the reason I ask is because if they've already done it, they should have done it for all the assets just outside of our city limits. And therefore, either I'd like to prevent duplicating the wheel, or us finding some kind of different result than what they find.
Okay, no, good point. Yes, we will investigate the status of that.
Okay.
Consistency is good.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Or find out why they decided what they decided, and if you have a different reason or different logic, present that to us. I'm not saying that you must agree with them, but I think that we would be remiss if we don't compare to what they've already done.
Well, possibly good point with Bradford as well, with the airport, that may already,
Yeah.
Might already
Mary
be
Lou.
included. Yeah. Okay, yeah, we'll definitely make note of that.
Cemeteries in Bradford, by the way.
Half
Oh.
of it is.
Oh, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, of course. Right.
Nationally.
yes.
Do you have any questions, Ryan? No?
Well, maybe. No, I mean, I think this is great. This is perfect time to be doing it. Guess we should have done it yesterday, but I'm glad we're doing it. The question that I have relates more to, do you ever have negative feedback from communities where you do these vulnerability assessments?
No, I feel like most of the communities
Okay.
on board, especially knowing they're not paying for it. So knowing that there's
No, I'm not
state
talking
funding.
about elected officials, but from the community. We have no one here for public comments.
Mhm.
Is there, have you ever had a situation where they were concerned about it raising insurance rates? Because I know that can, well, that's not a primary driver of actuarial assessments. I'm just thinking down the road, I could see maybe a negative feedback loop to the community, and I was just wondering if you'd ever encountered that.
I mean, I'd say in general, doing maybe a stormwater master plan where we've identified, hey, capital improvements are going to cost this much to bring it to
Okay.
that level of service, then yes, the stormwater rate might get increased. So there is always that concern, like let's say a fire station, or we identify something that may need to be raised, or some electrical panels that might be,
Sure, okay,
So
okay.
yes, I could see the concern down the road but having this completed, we are also eligible for grant funding. So that could be, hey, yes, we identified this need, now we can go after this grant to help mitigate for that.
I think this is wonderful, and I think it actually is good for everyone to know whether or not they really need extra coverage or something. I could see someone in the community not agreeing with that. We need to educate them. So I wanted to ask that question.
Yeah, can I add to that? The FEMA process for the firm maps, the flood insurance rate maps,
Yes.
that's a whole separate process and a lot more detailed modeling.
Yeah.
So this will never be used for
So it can
creation
never
of
be
a firm
used as
map.
part of that?
No, sir.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah, that's a whole different process.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
I think the big difference with the FEMA process is it doesn't particularly look at critical assets, where the state of Florida, I think, is really just looking to categorize all the critical assets and infrastructure within the state. We're just putting forward the city chunk of it.
Trust to be sure they're protected. So I only have 2 questions. So on the sequence that you just discussed there, step 1 to 6, about how long does it take? About 6 months, or that you have the answer to what you're going to come up with, or is it a year? I don't know.
We have a year total
Yeah.
from the
About a
time
year?
we started.
I think the grant had a year, and I want to think we were aiming to be much quicker than that.
I think the grant was actually built for 2 years.
I think possibly, yeah. The grant, we have plenty of time.
Plenty of time.
So yeah, and the grant does have at different milestones, there's certain reports that have to be written a certain way with
Yes,
certain
yes.
information. Yes, yes.
And they check it at the state too, so there is
Yes.
downtime while they're reviewing.
Yes.
And the only other thing is, definitely include the airport, in my opinion.
Okay.
It is one of our largest assets, and there's so much going on out there right now, especially with new business coming in.
Mm.
I think it's important to know what their situation is out there, and they may already have something in place that I'm not aware of, but it might be a good thing to check with Craig to find out. But I still think I'm sure.
That's the
y'all
airport
already-
manager.
Yeah.
Okay.
Craig
Okay.
Kennedy is our airport.
Mayor, the interesting issue with the airport, I believe it's gonna sit physically on top of the break of entire watersheds.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the Swanee watershed to the west and the St. John's to the east is right in the area, if not straddled by the airport. And so I think one of the engineering challenges is likely gonna be, how do you model, if it is, which I'm pretty sure it is, how do you model that?
There's not really, I mean, they have their hangars and they have the main building, but.
I think best case would be to see what Bradford, if they had
See what Bradford
something.
did.
Bradford, yeah, right.
Otherwise, it would be
They may have done as well.
a challenge, a budget challenge.
Yeah, well, let us look at the clay model. So unfortunately, they didn't give us the model, but we've been given, information enough to build our model. So yes, let us reach out and see what information we can get around there. Maybe if anything, we just create a smaller model just for the airport that might not be connected to the rest of the city, just because it is so far removed.
But Bradford, if they have completed the vulnerability assessment, they have that done.
Yeah, we'll definitely check that.
Just to be clear, the airport straddles the county line,
Okay.
just the same as it straddles the watershed boundaries. So half the airport is in Clay,
And the cemetery.
half the airport is in Bradford.
All right,
Oh,
you guys like to make it difficult,
Things are
right?
somewhere in Keystone.
Yeah, nothing easy here.
Yeah, not a problem. Let us investigate.
This is
Thank you.
not just the interior Florida, this is the hump of Florida. It runs north to south through this area.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have a watershed. Some of the water here goes toward the east and some of it goes toward the west. So just keep that in mind as you do it. We're like, even though we're only barely above 100 feet above sea level, we're the mountains that separate the east and west coast.
66 feet.
Well, that's how they measure lake levels. If the lake level says it's 89 feet, then it's 89 feet above sea level. Lake Brooklyn's, had been as high as 115 feet. So, anyway, when we had our parks plan done, I think we spent $35,000. When we had our smart streets plan done, that was like $130,000. Do you remember what that was?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't remember.
Maybe
It was
120.
120.
120. So, so you have 200 and, how much?
200,000.
Just 200, okay, right. To me, that sounds like you have plenty to do all this.
Yeah,
Would you agree that
Yeah.
that should not be a problem?
correct. No.
Great, okay, just wanted to double check.
We have additional allowances if we want to do additional like surveying. We try to break it up. I think we're getting some scanning done of some public records, so we're trying to utilize those. In general, all of that's going to be used for the model. So yeah, if there's any of these gaps in the data collection, we could get some surveying. We could get additional information done to give you the best product possible.
That's great, because in
Yeah.
the past, we've kind of been shortchanged. The parks plan lady didn't even walk our parks, didn't even walk it. And so, I'm glad to hear that you feel good about it.
Yes.
The last thing is that I learned, which I did not expect, was that it doesn't seem you're gonna address any existing flooding issues. You're only gonna do the vulnerability of key community pieces of property. And so, for example, down on Lakeview Drive, every time it rains, there is flooding on that street. I have to drive through it all the time, but that's not key. So is that something you want to address?
So we're not, I guess, specifically looking at capital improvements that can address funding, but in the creation of the stormwater model, we will be able to identify where some of these low-lying, I'll say, problems are, and be able to, you know, maybe look at those. I want to be careful what I say because this is being recorded and it's going to go to the state. So, yes.
Would it be fair to say that you will do, there'll be some sampling and modeling that will occur in real-time conditions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we will have the accurate model to the best of the information that we are going to be collecting to identify where those concerns are, and then you'll at least have that in the future to make those best capital improvement projects that you can.
And so for the benefit of our citizens, this is not about their property or their roads. This is about vulnerable or potentially vulnerable key community assets.
Sure.
Correct.
But we know where we have stormwater infrastructure that is struggling.
Mhm.
And the models will likely back that up. And then as the city's advocate in this process, we're gonna make sure that we get those documented. And so that in that process, make sure it's documented in the report. We should be able, if it's valid and the state considers it a resiliency issue, I would like to think that we can address some of these known nuisance flooding issues, as long as it's validated with the study information.
Sounds like that'll be a great side benefit.
We have already been out walking
Yeah.
the known sites where we have problems.
Such as Nightingale, for example.
I was gonna add to that map that Jen showed with the yellow lines, which were all the sub-basins within the city. Those are connected somehow with pipe ditches, swales. And so we started looking at those, how to connect them, but at the same time, looking at the ones where there are potential, known issues right now. So we walked that one day and looked at probably a handful, 6 items. And so as we start
Those
connecting
issues
those.
bubble up, I think, with that exposure,
Right.
with that focus on it.
Right.
Yeah, so if we model, if it shows that there's supposed to be a 48-inch culvert, but we've witnessed that it's collapsed, we can model that properly and maybe that'll show that flooding, and fixing that culvert will reduce
Just
the
further
flooding.
confirms it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one
yeah.
thing we did find is there's not a good data source for all of the inlets and piping in the city. It's just not there. So some of this will create that, but I think as we move forward, that may be something else that the city needs to look at, or I could work with Jamie on that. But I think once we have that in place, it's a lot easier to figure out what's going on, what the problem is. So the level of detail of this model is not down to each inlet and pipe, but in those areas where we do see there's problems today, we'll try to zoom in on that a little bit so we can focus on that.
You probably already knew this, but Clay County Utility Authority, they do have some pretty good maps, at least of our sewer and water.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we got
yes,
all
we
of
have
that,
that,
yeah.
yes.
It's what he's referring to as the stormwater system. Good digital layer of the stormwater pipes, their inlet elevation, outfalls, etc. We're still
Yeah,
trying to find it all.
okay.
We know where it is on the ground.
Even how the
Digital
pipes are
layer.
connected.
But how's it connected, what pipe size, because that's gonna change the connectivity of your whole basin, is that sized properly?
And we does have an inlet up behind the church that doesn't seem to go anywhere, but it's always full of water, so.
Okay.
Any more questions?